Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 11-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm here all season long trying to help you guys to become better MLB DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you want to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, Pennell16, CPenn16 over on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. You get access to all the extra content that I put out each and every single day or each and every single week, depending on the sport. And you can hop into the Discord chat as well. And it is the best time to sign up if you are interested because it's the first of the month and Patreon cycles on the first of the month. So if you're interested, now is really the best time to do so. If not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So, pretty big fan of the slate. I love when there's a bunch of mid-range pitching options because we have Coors Field in the slate, so I'm definitely want to spend up for some bats. Although I will say they kind of forgot to price up the Giants, so it's really not that hard to make lineups today. There's other good spots as well, but the pitching options are all pretty good in the mid-range. I don't think we really have to spend up today for the most part. And then Coors Field's there, and we have some other good spots as well, including the Indians, the Braves, and some other spots that I'm forgetting off the top of my head. So should be a pretty good one. So let's start with Adrian Hauser here at 8,500. Now, I saw some other places have Josh Lindblom listed as the starter, but from what I've read, it says Adrian Hauser is supposed to start. If Lindblom happened to start, I think he's like 6,800, 6,600. I think he'd be a fine option at that price tag versus Detroit. But let's just assume Hauser is the starter because I believe that's what it's going to be. But love righties here versus Detroit. Now, they're not like it's not like they have zero power or anything versus righties, but they have a 28.6% K rate. 180 ISO is not great, but it's a little, maybe a little up there, but it's not really nothing to be scared of. 234 batting average, 304 WOBA, and 89 WRC plus. And if you're looking at Hauser splits the last two seasons, he's got a 3.64 xFIP, a 24% K rate. Now, his one issue is with lefties. I mean, he still had a decent K rate versus them, but 190 ISO given up in a 347 WOBA. He was very, very tough on the righties, so I don't think he's really going to have much of an issue here. Vegas doesn't either. Only 4 runs for the Tigers, 62% chance for the win, and 5 strikeouts in Vegas. But if we're looking at his game log, to be honest, he's had a bit of a struggle this year. He's got a 4.36 ERA, which isn't horrendous. But if we're looking at the DraftKings points scored, those last few starts look 1, 7, 10, 6. That's not a great stretch of 4 games. But his first 2 starts of the season, he was at 14 and 25. I think we're probably gonna get. I think we should be able to get like 15 points from Hauser, maybe around 20 if he's on his game. But I just think he's a fine option. 8,500 isn't too much, and he gets a great matchup versus Detroit, and they love to strike out. And Hauser definitely has some strikeout upside, so I think he's a fine option here. Then we have Zach Plesac at 8,300. He is back with the big league club, and if you're wondering why he got sent down after such a good start, because if we're looking at his game log, the first 3 starts, he scored 38 points, 18, and then 27. He had a great start to the season. He was striking guys out, which he wasn't a big strikeout guy last season. If we're looking at his numbers, the past 2 seasons combined, it's only at a 20% K rate. But he was at 11, 6, and 7 strikeouts, and he was looking very good. But if you're wondering why he got sent down, it's because him and Mike Clevenger, I believe they went out with friends or something in Chicago last time they were playing the White Sox, and they broke the team rules. They left, and look, they put everyone in a bad situation. Obviously, could have led to an outbreak. Fortunately, that was not the case. But Plesac's back, and I think he's a fine option here. He wasn't someone we had to worry about a pitch count. His first 3 starts of the season, he was at 98, 103, and 95, and he gets a soft matchup here versus the Royals. We just saw Shane Bieber just kind of mow through those guys, and I know Zach Plesac is not Shane Bieber, but Plesac's been just fine so far this season. I don't see why that's really going to change, even though he hasn't pitched in the big leagues since August 8th, but even then, it's only a little bit less than a month, which, look, I think he'll be okay here. So if we're looking at the Royals splits versus righties, 24% K rate, 174 ISO, 235 batting average, 90 WRC plus. This is the definition of average. So I think Plesac's fine at that price tag of 8,300. I'd have to imagine the Royals are going to have a pretty low implied team total. Then Framber Valdez at 8,100. He's probably going to be the chalkiest pitcher on the slate if I had to guess. Only 8,100, and he's had a pretty good season. When I first saw his price tag, I was really surprised because if we're looking at his game log, I mean 29, 23, 20, 27, 26, then 4 in his first start versus the Dodgers. So yeah, everyone gets a pass versus the Dodgers, but for the most part, he's been great this season. He's striking guys out. He had 8 strikeouts, 9, 5, 5, and 11. He's been well over 100 pitches in quite a few of his starts. So I like Framber Valdez quite a bit here. And the Rangers, they're offensively, they've been pretty bad so far this year. If you're looking at their overall splits, a 65 WRC plus, a 280 WOBA, and a 131 ISO. And if you look at the numbers versus lefties, those are bad too. 145 ISO, 24% K rate, 71 WRC plus. I love Valdez here. He's probably going to be the highest owned pitcher on the slate, and that's fine with me. I think you're just playing him in cash games. I think he's an excellent option. No team total out yet for the Rangers, but I'd have to imagine it's going to be below 4 probably, and 6.5 strikeouts in Vegas, and he should be a pretty heavy favorite. So definitely like Framber Valdez. And then if you want a cheaper option, I was a little bit iffy on this, but Ian Anderson, he was very impressive in his first start versus the Yankees, where he struck out 6 and had 25.1 fantasy points, and he was running a no-hitter too, I believe, into the 7th inning. Then he gave up a homer to Luke Voigt, if I remember correctly. But yeah, he's got good stuff. We know he's a top prospect, and at only 6,800 versus Boston, it doesn't really scare me too much. Boston has not been great this season. We'll have to see if JD Martinez is back in the lineup. But even then, he hasn't been that great this season, so I don't really think it would concern me too much. Maybe a guy like Verdugo, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, maybe those are the concern spots. But at only 6,800, he's got good stuff. He should be able to rack up some strikeouts. And if you're looking at the Red Sox splits versus righties this season, they have a 24.5% K rate. Now, some of their numbers are a little bit up there, but 320 WOBA, 96 WRC plus, 179 ISO. It's really nothing to like run to the hills run for the hills. Or something. You guys know what I'm trying to say. So Ian Anderson, I think at 6,800, I think he is a fine option here. He doesn't get me like too excited, but if you want to fit in some bigger bats, I don't hate the idea of using Anderson. And then we'll move on to the bats, which are pretty loaded today. I think I have quite a few guys listed, so I apologize. I'm going to try to talk through it pretty quick, but yeah, lots of good options here. But we'll start with Will Smith at 3,700. For the most part, catcher. I really don't care who you play catcher. Just if a guy fits at the end of your stack, so say you're stacking for some reason, if you're stacking the Pirates, you throw Jacob Stallings at the end. If you're stacking the Cubs, Victor Caratini. Or if you're stacking the Dodgers, Will Smith. Or if you just have a guy that fits at the end and he's 2,000, go for it. I think Michael Perez is 2,000, so I think that's viable. But Will Smith, I actually prefer him versus righties, but the Dodgers have one of the higher team totals on the slate. And if you're going to notice, there's like no team totals out yet. I was looking at Vegas, and there's like nothing out besides a few games. So I apologize for that. I usually like having those listed, but I'd have to guess the Rockies and the Giants are going to have team totals probably above 6. The Braves should be close to 6 versus Ryan Weber. The Indians are probably going to be close to 6 versus Matt Harvey. And if I don't think I have anything else listed for the most part. So pretty much what all of these consist of. So I just know that I think a lot of these games are going to be pretty high. But anyway, Will Smith, I actually prefer him versus righties. So I did update these splits. They are now consisted of 2020 statistics. I said I've been waiting, and I figured, you know what, I'll finally do it. September 1st, I'll update the statistics for the 2020 season. And Will Smith last year was better versus righties compared to lefties, and that is the case once again. This year he's got a 193 ISO to lefties and a 381 ISO to righties. So I know he's facing a lefty, but Alex Young says not that great of a pitcher. If you're looking at his splits, pretty tough on lefties, but versus righties, a 200 ISO and a 20% K rate. So I think Will Smith's going to be fine here at 3,700. Then with Victor Caratini at 3,000. I prefer lefties here versus Chad Kuhl. The Cubs do have a team total of over 5. Now, it's not the best hitter's park in the world in Pittsburgh, so I'm not overly excited about these Cubs. I do not have Anthony Rizzo, Kyle Schwarber, and Ian Happ listed, but I do think they're playable, but I didn't want to have 50 players listed. I had to make some cuts because I did actually have them on here at first, and then I'm like, well, I have 50 players, so I got to cut some people out of the list. But I think, the Cubs are fine here, like the Cubs lefties. If you're looking at Caratini's splits versus righties this season, I mean, the numbers aren't too pretty, only a 255 batting average, but a 186 ISO is not terrible, and I prefer lefties here versus Chad Kuhl, so Caratini is fine at that price tag. Then Jacob Stallings, last season he was excellent versus lefties, and he's kind of carrying that over this year as well, a 202 WRC plus, a 255 ISO, and a 472 WOBA. So don't mind Jacob Stallings versus John Lester. I'm surprised John Lester keeps getting priced as high as he does on Draftkings, because he's not the same pitcher he used to be. So someone over on Draftkings must be a big John Lester fan. But anyway, Jacob Stallings, he's fine. Prefer righties versus Lester, a 340 WOBA given up, a 183 ISO. Yeah, don't mind Stallings. Dropping down to a more exciting position, we have quite a few spots here. And again, I had to make some cuts. I had a lot more guys listed, but I was like, I gotta trim the list down a little bit. But Freddie Freeman at 5,300. Love all the Braves here versus Ryan Weber. The Boston whoever Boston pretty much throws out every single day is just usually not a very good pitcher, and they can tend to just get smashed pretty much every single day. And Weber, looking at his splits versus lefties, only a 14% K rate, a 268 ISO, giving up in a 400 WOBA. Yeah, Freddie Freeman's going to be a pretty good play on paper here. Freeman crushes righties, and he crushed them last year. He's crushing them again. He always has in his career. 177 WRC plus, 416 on base percentage, and a 280 ISO. So yes, I like Freddie Freeman. And even though Weber is pretty tough on the righties, I still think you can play all the righties here. I think you can full stack this Braves lineup for the most part. Then we have Brandon Belt at 4,200. I think he's going to be one of the most popular plays in the entire slate. And like I was saying, they kind of forgot to price up some of these Giants. Like we got Belt at 4,200. Sandoval at 2,700, even though I know he's not that great. Evan Longoria at 4,200. And then Yastrzemski is the only guy they really priced up at 5,800. But then you got Alex Dickerson, who should be betting second at 3,600. Like they just forgot to price some of these guys up. So I think they're going to be pretty chalky. And we know they're going to have one of the highest team totals on this slate. John Gray is not a pitcher that really scares me. He was fine in his last start, but that was not in Coors Field. I don't think so. Yeah, I think it was in Arizona. But John Gray has not been that great this season. He's definitely someone I prefer lefties against. So feel free to load up the entire lineup, but do prefer the lefties. If you're looking at Belt's numbers this season versus righties, 186 ISO, a 432 WOBOs, 178 WRC plus, and a 606 slugging, and a 338 batting average. So yes, I like Brandon Belt, one of my favorite plays in the entire slate at only 4,200. And John Gray, the numbers are kind of similar, but he does give it more to the lefties. And look, the whole lineup is playable here. And then we have Carlos Santana, 4,100. Do you like the Indians here versus Matt Harvey? Now, they are not a consistent team. Trust me, I'm an Indians fan. They are not consistent in the slightest. They can have games where they go off. Then there's games where they look like complete trash. So you kind of got to hope you get them on the good night. So that's why it's tough to play them in cash games, because they're just, it's hard to trust them. But in GPPs, definitely like him here versus Matt Harvey. Matt Harvey is a guy that really sucks versus lefties, and he's going to see a ton of lefties here. And Carlos Santana, looking at his splits versus righties this year, he's got a 237 ISO with 381 on base percentage, horrendous 190 batting average, but he does walk a lot, 26% walk rate. And Matt Harvey, looking at his splits, he's bad versus either side of the plate, so it doesn't really matter to me what you use. But over the course of his career, he's been a little bit worse versus lefties, a 400 WOBA given up past 2 seasons, and a 276 ISO. So yes, love all the Indians here in tournaments. You can probably play like 1 or 2 in cash games, but you definitely don't stack them in cash. Then we have Daniel Murphy here at 4,000. Man, the Rockies were just horrendous last night. Like, I had a nice Rocky stack, thinking I'm like, oh yeah, I got the late night hammer. Here I come. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I played Story, Hilliard, Tapia, and Daniel Murphy, and then I ran it back with Trent Grisham. I think that netted me 5 points total. What? That was horrendous. So that's baseball, you know. Guys don't get hit sometimes, but that's why it's a very high variant sport. But I'm willing to go right back to the well. Kevin Gausman, he's been pretty good this season. There's no denying that. I don't think he's an absolute gas can out there, but we're also in Coors Field, so I'll give the advantage to the Rockies over Kevin Gausman. And Daniel Murphy, he's fine versus righties. I mean, he's not going to have a ton of power, but he's a consistent hitter, near 300 batting average, only a 13% K rate, only a 171 ISO. But look, we're Coors Field, 4,000, he's fine. But look, Brandon Belt's only 200 more, and he's got much higher power potential, so just plug in Belt today. And then Pablo Sandoval, 2,700, switch hitter, but you'll get the lefty on righty matchup here versus John Gray. And if you're looking at his splits versus righties this season, it's not pretty. A 194 batting average, a 258 slugging, but he does have a 232 ISO. But the rest of the numbers are dark red, so don't get too excited about Sandoval. But I like the price tag. But for real, I'm just gonna try to just play Belt today for the most part. He just grades out so well. Then dropping down to second base, once again, not the best position in the world. It's kind of been a common theme the past few days. But I think you can still play Jace Peterson at second base. So if you need a pump play, there you go. But Ryan McMahon, 4,500. Look, we're in Coors Field. That's pretty much as far as depth analysis I'm going to go. I mean, Kevin Gausman's been fine this season, but you get a cheap lefty on righty matchup in Coors. Well, I say cheap, but 4,500. You get a mid-range lefty on righty matchup in Coors, but I don't love it. Robinson Cano, I'd probably rather play Cano than Ryan McMahon. He's been fine versus righties this season, looking at his splits over a 200 ISO, a 469 WOBA, and a 204 WRC plus with a 421 batting average. So, yeah, Cano's been very good versus the righties this season. And Asher Wojciechowski, I mean, as a whole, I like the Mets tonight. I think I forgot to mention them, but I think the Mets are one of the better stacks on the slate as well, with surprisingly a 13 total as well, above 5. Asher Wojciechowski is not a terrible pitcher, but he does struggle with the lefties, and we're hitting in Baltimore, which is a fantastic fantastic hitter's park, and the Orioles bullpen's not that great either. And they also traded Castro, which was actually one of their better arms in the bullpen. So I think we can certainly target this Mets lineup. And if you're looking at Wojciechowski's splits versus lefties and righties, he still gives up power to righties, but he does have a 24% K rate versus them. But last season, the lefties, 287 ISO given up, a 367 WOBA, and a 19% K rate. So prefer the lefties here versus Wojciechowski. You can do a full stack and include some righties, but definitely like the lefties here in Cano. He has smashed righties this season. Cesar Hernandez, 4,200. Again, I like the Indian stack here versus Matt Harvey. Matt Harvey's just not that great versus lefties. And if we're looking at Hernandez splits versus righties this season, they have improved from last season. A little bit more power as well. 152 ISO, 357 WOBA, 121 WRC plus, and a 293 batting average. So I think he's fine for stacking Indians. Nolan Arenado, he's in Coors Field. I don't think I have to go too in-depth there. Kevin Gausman, like I've said, he's been a fine pitcher this season, but Coors Field, and I'll give Nolan Arenado the advantage over Kevin Gausman. He's great versus lefties and versus righties. Always prefer him better versus lefties, but Arenado in Coors is always playable. Jose Ramirez, 5,400, a guy that can be very, very streaky, which I hate playing him in cash games, but he's got power-speed combo. He's not a big stolen base guy, but I remember last time I played him, he did give me a stolen base, which I did appreciate from Jose Ramirez. But looking at his splits this season, 239 ISO to righties, only a 227 batting average, which is horrendous. He's been better versus lefties this year, but he's fine versus either side of the plate, and Matt Harvey tends to get blasted by left-handed bats. Evan Longoria, 4,200. If you're looking at his splits, prefer him better versus lefties, but again, we're in Coors Field. He's only 4,200. It's just a simple mispricing on some of these Coors guys, so definitely like all the Giants here. Austin Reilly, 3,400. He was like an inch away from a homer last night. Like, if you played Austin Reilly, he still got a 3-run triple, but man, he was like, it hit the top of the wall, very top of the wall. But anyway, Austin Reilly, he's still cheap, and I do like the Braves bats on this slate if we're looking at his splits versus righties this season. So versus lefties, he actually had a 385 ISO and only an 8 WRC plus, which seems odd. But versus righties, over a 200 ISO still, a 257 batting average, 114 WRC plus. He's okay for the price tag. I'm just not sure if I'm gonna try to get up to like a Longoria or Arenado or Ramirez for the most part. But if I need some salary savings, Riley's fine because Ryan Weber's just not a good pitcher. Then dropping down to shortstop, we have Trevor Story, 5,700. Did absolutely nothing last night, which was unfortunate because I had him. But you know, that's just how baseball works sometimes. But he's fine versus lefties and versus righties, and we're in Coors Field, and it's pretty much it to say. I mean, Coors Field bats are Coors Field bats. Coors tends to go off most nights. Sometimes they suck, but that's baseball. Francisco Lindor, 5,300. He has not had a great season for the most part, but he's always been better versus righties, and that's been true so far this year with a 263 ISO. With the batting average is better versus lefties, but the power's been better versus righties. And look, Matt Harvey's just not a guy that's going to concern me here, so I think we can load up all the lefties versus Matt Harvey. I also think you can use righties as well. Brandon Crawford, 3,900. Again, not the greatest bat in the world, but some decent splits versus righties with a 278 batting average, a 338 WOBA, and a 115 WRC plus. But just a cheap lefty in Coors Field versus John Gray. Nelson Cruz at 6,200. He's facing Dallas Keuchel. Now, Dallas Keuchel's not a guy I like to stack against, but anytime Nelson Cruz faces a lefty, he is going to be in play for me. Now, he is super expensive, so you're just using him if you have a boatload of money left. But I probably can't see myself getting to Nelson Cruz today, to be honest, because I feel like he just wouldn't fit a stack for me. But look, he crushes lefties, and these are the updated numbers. Last season, the numbers were pretty similar, but this season, again, look, it's even better versus lefties so far. 297 WRC plus, a 611 WOBA, 461 ISO, over 1,000 slugging, 438 batting average. The guy is just insane. So anytime he's facing a lefty, yeah, he's going to be playable. It's just that price tag is a little rough. Charlie Blackmon facing a righty in Coors Field. I think that's pretty much as in-depth you need to go. But 255 ISO versus them this season, 360 on base percentage. He's actually been better versus the lefties with a 535 batting average, 229 WRC plus, 537 WOBA, and a 274 ISO. But look, he's always been great versus righties in his career, especially in Coors Field. Mike Yastrzemski, 5,800. So he's the one guy that's just really expensive on the Giants. So I understand if you just want to skip him, but if you're full stack on the Giants, he is their best bat for the most part. And he's fine versus lefties and versus righties. Versus righties this season, he's been excellent. 250 ISO, 403 WOBA, 159 WRC plus, 547 slugging, and a 300 batting average. So yeah, Yastrzemski's fine if you got the money. Dominic Smith, another lefty here versus Wojciechowski, and we're actually going to have a run of 3 lefties here versus Wojciechowski, but so I'll try to keep it simple, but if we're just going to look at their splits versus righties really quick, let's go through that really quick. So Dominic Smith versus righties this season, a 746 slugging, 343 batting average, 460 WOBA, and a 250 ISO. Brandon Nimmo has not been as great in the power department, but still a 443 WOBA, 187 WRC plus, 300 batting average, and 571 slugging. And then Michael Conforto to end this run, 280 ISO, 405 WOBA, 382 on base percentage, 161 WRC plus, and a 342 batting average. So all these guys grade out as the lead options here, and I think you can full stack the Mets today with confidence. And then, sorry, there's a lot of outfielders here, but it's a loaded position today. Marcell Ozuna, 4,200. He's good versus lefties and versus righties, and I just like the whole Brave stack here versus Ryan Weber. Then we have Franmil Reyes, 4,100. He's got power versus both sides of the plate. Last season, he actually had more power versus righties. And that's the case again this season with a 271 ISO to righties, 382 WOBA. Does strike out a lot, but still has a 300 batting average to righties this season, 553 slugging, and a 138 WRC plus. So I think he's a fine addition on Indian stacks. Then we have Raimel Tapia at 4,000. Not a big power bat, but he is leading off for the Rockies. And I will say I'm not in love with the Rockies here. I like the Giants better, but if you're stacking Rockies, I think Tapia is fine. AJ Pollock versus a lefty. I mean, he's always been good versus lefties in his career. That holds true again this season with a 212 ISO, 384 WOBA, 146 WRC plus, a 333 batting average, and just pretty good numbers all around. So definitely don't mind Pollock, and Young is a guy that will struggle with the right-handed bats. Then Alex Dickerson, I mean, they just forgot to price him up for some reason. Only 3,600. I think he's going to end up being very chalky today. Now, the problem is there's so many good plays today. Like the Mets, they're easily stackable. The Rockies are stackable. The Giants are stackable. The Indians are stackable. The Braves are stackable. So if you're someone like me that builds 1 to 3 lineups, it's going to be tough to try to pick what to put in my lineup, to be honest. But even the Dodgers are stackable, too. I forgot about them. So, yeah, it's going to be a tricky night to figure out who you want to put in your lineup. But I don't mind Pollock, Alex Dickerson. I was talking about Alex Dickerson. Like if you're looking at his splits versus righties this season, they're not great, but 220 batting average, but over 200 ISO. And again, we're in Coors Field, so feel free to load him up at only 3,600. Michael Brantley. I feel like I haven't talked about Michael Brantley in a while, but he's only 3,200 going against Luis Garcia here. And if you're looking at his splits versus righties this season, over a 220 ISO, a 380 on base percentage, a 130 WRC plus, 291 batting average. Typical Michael Brantley things here. He is striking out a bit more than he did last season, but he's only 3,200, so he's fine. But I'm probably not going to go there just because I'm not really that interested in the Astros for the most part. I'd rather get exposure to offenses I like better, like the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Rockies for the most part. Then Kevin Pillar, he got traded to the Rockies, so if he happens to make the lineup tonight, I think he's fine at only 3,200. I prefer him versus lefties, but again, if he makes the lineup at 3,200 in Coors Field, he's certainly playable. Then Sam Hilliard going to be hitting near the bottom of the order at 2,600, but he's fine versus either side of the plate this season versus righties. He has a 371 ISO, and versus lefties, he's got a 400 ISO. So either way, I think he's a fine play here, and that's pretty much going to be it for this slate, guys. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, remember to leave a like. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really do appreciate it. If you want to sign up on Patreon, feel free to do so. Links in the description below. And that's going to be it. And I hope you guys enjoy your Tuesday.